Yes. Hello from California and all of those that are joining from around the country. We're so glad to that you've taken the time out to join us on this evening or afternoon, depending on where you are in the country. We're going to go ahead and get started. Thank you so much again. My name is Janet Jones Jordan. Welcome and thank you for joining Autism Speaks for our Navigating a New Autism Diagnosis for Young Children and School-Aged Children. And for those who may be interested, we will be hosting part two on next Wednesday, November 10th at 5 o'clock p.m. And that will focus on new diagnoses for young adults and adults. We're so happy to have you with here today. I am one of the outreach directors. I reside in the Atlanta area. We are joined by Marianne Sullivan, who's also an outreach director, and Colleen Shan, one of the other outreach directors, and you'll be hearing from her very shortly. Marianne and I are also proud parents of sons who have an autism diagnosis. And then you will hear from our very own Dr. Pamela Dixon. She's a director of clinical services and inclusion, and she will be moderating a conversation with the Krisen family and Mr. Sean Bradley. Both of them have volunteered to share their experiences of what it's like to be a parent of a child with an autism diagnosis. And then following that conversation, you will hear from our keynote speaker, which is Dr. Amanda Bennett. She is the lead of the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia's Autism Care Network site. And she's also a developmental pediatrician. She cares for children with autism and related conditions at that same location. And then we will hear from Kelly Hedrick, who is the Senior Director of State and Government Affairs and Grassroots Advocacy at Autism Speaks. And then we will round off this important conversation this evening with Susan Kelso. And Susan is one of our amazing autism response team associates here at Autism Speaks. And she's going to talk about additional resources to help you and your loved ones through your journey. Now, right now, I am going to turn it over to Colleen Shan, who is one of the other outreach directors, and she will share Autism Speaks mission and proceed with today's program. Thank you so much, Colleen.
Thank you so much, Janet. Good evening or afternoon, everyone, depending on where you are located in the country. We're really glad you're joining us today. Autism Speaks is dedicated to promoting solutions across the spectrum and throughout the lifespan for the needs of individuals with autism and their families. We do this through advocacy and support, increasing understanding and acceptance of people with autism, and advancing research into causes and better interventions for autism spectrum disorder and related conditions. Led by our president and CEO, Keith Wargo, our national board, and our senior leadership team, diversity, equity, accessibility, and inclusion is ingrained within our culture here at Autism Speaks. We strive to provide a sense of belonging for our staff and for the many diverse constituents that we serve. It's clear that our mission helps us to grow in new ways and continue to build capacity for a sustaining organization today and over a lifetime. I will now share just a few housekeeping items with you. We are going to be recording this program, and the recording will be made available as part of our follow-up resource that you will receive via email in the upcoming days. And because we have such a large audience, we won't be able to answer everyone's questions today, but we will attempt to answer some if we have time. And please note that because of privacy issues and HIPAA, we would direct all personal questions and concerns to our autism response team who is attending today, or you can contact them directly yourself at help@autismspeaks.org. At this time, I would like to introduce to you Dr. Pam Dixon. Dr. Dixon is our Director of Clinical Services and Inclusion here at Autism Speaks, and she will introduce you to our guest families. Thanks again for being here. Dr. Dixon.
Thank you, Colleen. I'm so happy to be on the call today, and it is my pleasure to introduce to you two families who have so generously and graciously agreed to share their stories with us. We know from speaking to many families that it means something special to hear from another family what their experiences are. So I will introduce you first, and then I have some questions that we will go over. So I am going to introduce Julie and Oliver Krisen. So you could just wave at us and say hello.
Hi,
Hi.
Pamela. How you doing?
Fine, how are you? And they are the son of Isaac, who is age 12. Is that correct?
That's right.
And
Yep.
then do you have other children as well? There are other children in the family?
Yes, Lucas
Yeah.
is 9.
Okay, very nice. Thank you. And with you, we're going to pretend like we are in a coffee house, sitting at a table. If I could offer you a virtual cup of coffee right now, I would do that. But you would be on one side of the table and Sean Bradley would be on the other. And so welcome, Sean, to the conversation as well. And you are the father of another Sean, I believe, the third, correct?
Yes, ma'am. Correct.
Yeah.
Nice to
And
meet you.
he's 5 years old, right?
Yes, ma'am.
Nice to meet you. Did you have other children that you wanted to introduce as well?
Oh no, that's all.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Thank you both. So what I'll do is I will ask you a few questions. These are the kinds of questions that other parents we think would find helpful to know the answers to and to hear your experiences of. So we will start with Julie and Oliver. Can you tell us how old Isaac was when you first noticed that there were things that seemed different in his development?
I would say Isaac was around 2 or 2.5 years old.
Okay. Okay.
Should I elaborate or?
Yeah, probably. I mean,
Yeah.
Did you want to share? How about just
Sure.
giving us just a few comments on what it was that you noticed that seemed different about his development?
Well, in a nutshell, he started trying words, but then kind of clammed up and wasn't speaking too much at all. And he also was, playing a little bit differently, which, coupled with his not being terribly verbal, that's what set it off for us. And by playing differently, I mean, he would arrange toys rather than play with them, and he seemed very, shy around other kids, which that really didn't tip our hand. But, lots of people are shy, but all these things together, I would say. I don't know if you want to add.
yeah, I think his speech was the first kind of real indicator that something was off, because he started speaking, he made most of his milestones very early, like walking, first words, and he was building vocabulary, and then sort of around 1.5 years, it kind of just sort of stopped. And he just wasn't making as much progress. And being first-time parents, we didn't really know what to expect. It was difficult to measure, hey, is this typical or not, with no real measuring stick. And so we kind of noticed, definitely by the time he was 2 and well past that he was not making the progress he should be making. And then we also knew that he definitely had some sensory sensitivities. He had those, he would get
Really young.
easily overwhelmed when he was even very little baby, but that happens to a lot of babies. So we weren't sure, it's hard to tell again.
We thought he was just hard.
Yeah.
Sure.
Because he was friendly enough with people, but he clearly got to a point where he had enough, and a lot of noise and a lot of sounds and too much touching. He loved touching us, but it could get overwhelming for him.
Sure. It sounds like there were a few different things, and when you put it all together, that's when you decided, oh, let's see, what might be happening here.
It was really in preschool too. We had wonderful people. We put him in preschool right at age 3, and they pretty much right away, within 2 months, recommended screening. So we got on the train then.
Good. Well, thank you for sharing. Sean, how about you? How old was Sean the third when you first noticed that there were differences in his development?
Well, I would say he was 1. I would say that was my first child as well. So he didn't know what to expect, or I didn't put too many, I guess, expectations on him. I just allowed, grow at his own pace. But we would take him to the doctor, and the doctor pretty much brought it up to our attention because he just wasn't walking. That was the only problem. He would speak. So he pretty much he hit all his milestones that he needed to up 1. But then moving forward, going to age 2, I started to notice other things as far as him not crawling or crawling properly. He kind of on the certain foods that he ate. And that was pretty much it. Overall, he's always been willing to communicate with other kids. He's never really had any, I guess, problems with sensory. It's just been pretty much speech with him. So, yes, ma'am.
Thank you, Sean. We often find that on the journey to getting an autism diagnosis, that children receive other diagnoses prior to the autism diagnosis or alongside. Was that either of your experiences, either with Isaac or with Sean, that there was something else before the autism diagnosis?
Yeah, so we definitely got our pediatrician, when his speech was delayed, gave him a PDD NOS, which is, you know, pervasive development disorder, non-specific, which as a parent, I was like, is this just like a label of like, he's not speaking by now, right? So she didn't explain that very well. Now that's kind of categorized as autism as far as I understand it. But you know, that just kind of gave us a label that basically was like, we don't know what's going on. Later when we had someone from the school system look at him, because it took us almost 10 months to get in to see a psychiatrist, because we, you know, filled out so much endless paperwork and the wait was just forever. But someone from the school system looked at him and they couldn't diagnose him, but she was very much of like, your son has sensory processing. She kind of recommends some books we might want to read, which was kind of a very subtle way to give us hints about it. But she was sort of thinking, she was more on the lines that he definitely has sensory processing issues. And so I got sort of the feeling that that was more of what she thought was going on. And it wasn't until we finally saw a psychologist that they kind of were like, no, this is, autism is the best label for this at this point.
Sure. Okay. Thank you for sharing. How about you, Sean?
Well, well, that was the only diagnosis.
Okay.
But I will say that it took me a while to actually really get on board with the diagnosis itself, because going up to the year 1, like I said, I was pretty much comfortable with where he was. He could have just said my name. He could have just said Dad all day, and I would have gone with that.
Yeah.
You know, so that was my perspective. So moving forward, like I said, it took for him to, I believe, get diagnosed with autism at year 2, and all up until that time, it was just me pretty much in denial, I guess, because I really didn't understand what it was. And I guess my background, we're not really prone to, I guess, categories or categorizing our kids, so to speak. So it was really just me finally understanding, coming to terms with my son having autism or something that's called autism. So, yeah.
Thank you. I think you've both families, you've pointed out that, you know, there's a journey that it's rarely straightforward. You know, a straightforward process of getting from first concern to diagnosis, that it can be, you know, sometimes a crooked path, you know, to get to that point where, especially because the diagnosis is often the thing that opens the door for getting services. And it takes some bravery on your part, you know, some courage to persevere. So I commend you for getting, you know, to the point that you're at right now. Are there, you know, just keeping in mind that there are other parents who will listen to this, are there some resources, some Autism Speaks resources that you have found useful that you would recommend to other families of young children?
The life kits are amazing. Especially, you know, we've been using the one that, you know, our son is now 12. And, you know, we don't have another son above him. So entering those adolescent years with puberty is, you know, we have no idea what to expect. So we use those And they've been really helpful in like navigating some issues that were like, okay, well, maybe this is bothering him or that's bothering him, you know, and he's not telling us, you know. So
Sure.
those are one I can think of specifically, but all the support groups are really great too.
Okay.
You know, I feel like there's one for about everything. So, you know.
Great. Thank you for that. Sean, did you have resources you want to
Yeah.
recommend to other parents?
Well, I know what resources work for me, so to speak. Like I said, it was a time period where I didn't understand what it was. So how I really got started or involved with my son and, you know, just him, his learning, I guess, abilities and stuff. I pretty much started with, I believe it was, it's, my apologies, I'm having like a little brain, but I believe it's occupational therapy. It was it's occupational therapy, and yeah, occupational therapy worked a lot, just as far as just him dealing with just how to deal with certain things, grab certain things, with his using his hands, so to speak. So I think that helped out a lot. Yeah, that helped out a great
Thank
deal.
you. Great. Thank you. And so then our time is coming short, but I also wanted to ask the question, you know, keeping in mind that other parents are listening to this and recognizing that everybody's journey is different, right? Is there advice that you would give families who are have concerns but don't yet have diagnosis, or, you know, are new to diagnosis? Things that you would want to share with them in terms of information or encouragement in their journey?
I would absolutely say to follow your instincts, because you're going to see it's going to involve a lot of people and a lot of labels. Like Sean said, you know, we are people that like to label our children either, and you have to, I think, you know, don't be afraid to advocate for yourself. And you know, there are going to be people who tell you there's only one way to do something, and if you don't agree with that, go get a second opinion. Go get, you know, don't be afraid to do anything that you think will help, because you never know. I don't know what you used to say.
I also say knowledge is important. So, I mean, one of the best things you can do is try to take the time to just learn more about it. I mean, I think some of the stuff that's helped me the most, there's some books out there that give the perspective from the autistic individual. And that is, to me, really eye-opening, because it kind of gives you the point of view of like, hey, my son sees things completely differently than I do. And he looks at me and thinks, what the hell are you doing, right? So I think, you know, understanding that, understanding the diversity of viewpoints from the autistic mind kind of helps you understand, you know, what they're going through and what their life is like. And that's helpful for me.
Great, thank you. Sean, did you want to, you know, again, recognizing that everyone's journey is unique, is there anything that you would recommend for families, either who are concerned, have, you know, their initial concerns, but don't have diagnosis, or they've just received a diagnosis?
Yeah, I would definitely say to do my research, but you know, like they said as well, definitely get a second opinion, and just being patient. I think that's important, and being involved in the community. I think that's very important, and just being able to give the child an environment that pretty much nurtures their needs and what they need to grow.
That's great. Anything else that you think is important for to share to families that are listening, that either of you would like to share, or any of you?
Be patient with yourself, because this is going to be hard on you, and don't be afraid. I will share personally and vulnerably that I sought treatment for anxiety shortly before this came up, and it ended up being such a valuable tool for me to help manage the Isaac situation. The therapist I talked to helped hold me accountable, and the myriad of appointments we had. And she actually was instrumental in helping us find the person who gave Isaac his first initial diagnosis, who said,
Okay.
and the school system knew this woman and took him into school earlier than the 10 months we had to wait for the real thing. So don't be afraid. Don't be hard on yourself. Don't be, your kids, your kids, just love them. And as Sean said, give them the environment they need, not the things that society expects of them.
That's good. Thank you, Julie. Sean, anything you would want parents to know?
Oh, definitely. Just that there's no right or wrong way to parenting, just like, parenting any other child. And I think, they stated, it does take a certain amount of courage, to step out and, ask for help or, or even to believe what you believe when it comes to raising your child. So, yeah, definitely. Just be in tune with your child as much as possible.
That's great. So before we end, I have one final question, and that is if you would be willing to share just one thing that you are really proud of about your son at this point, right? I know that you have lots of things to choose from, but you can just think. I know I'm putting you on the spot a little bit, but if you could just share with us something that you just really like about his personality, or something that you're very proud of.
I don't know. I'm proud of how kind of just joyous he is.
Yeah, he's a funny kid.
Yeah.
As much as sometimes he's hard to understand, he just makes everyone around him happier, And so I think that is great, and everyone, he just brings this positivity to people around him, and that's something I love about him.
He's brave. He's really brave. He goes into new situations lately and just tries his heart out and does, as Oliver said, he just does it with this smile and just such an exuberance that, you can't help but be so happy to be around him.
Yeah, no, he's not happy all the time.
No.
But he finds a way to make it silly.
Yeah,
so,
That's great.
So,
That's wonderful.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for sharing that. And then Sean, how about you? Anything that you wanted to share about Sean the third?
Oh yes, definitely. I would say he's silly. He has a great sense of humor, and as they said, I received the same thing from my son. He's just abundance of joy, and he's speech delayed, but he gets his point across. So
yes,
it's a party in my house. So
that's wonderful. That's wonderful. Thank you so very much for sharing your experiences. And, we greatly appreciate that. I know that the parents listening will appreciate it as well. So
absolutely. Thank you for the opportunity.
You're very welcome. Very welcome. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Oh, I'm sorry.
No, I was just going to say, I'm going to pass it back over to Pauline.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Dixon. And thank you so much to the wonderful families who agreed to share your stories with us today. They're so important, and we really appreciate you very, very much. So now I'd like to take this time to introduce to you our keynote speaker, Dr. Amanda Bennett. Dr. Bennett, who is the lead of the Children's Hospital in Philadelphia's Autism Care Network, and she is also a developmental pediatrician. And at this time, I'm going to turn the program over to Dr. Bennett. And then when I return, we were going to hear from our advocacy team and our Autism Speaks Autism Response team, followed by a Q&A. So thank you again for being here, and welcome, Dr. Bennett.
Thanks so much for having me. So I was asked to talk about almost anything that I thought parents might want to know or need to know after a new diagnosis. So I just put together a few slides on advice, things that I want to make sure my families know after I'm talking to them about autism for the first time. Next slide. So the first thing to remember, and I'm sure many of you have seen these numbers before, is that autism is actually pretty common. So the rate of autism diagnosis seems to have been increasing over the last couple of decades. And at this point, about 2%, almost 2% of the population has some experience with an autism diagnosis, which means that friends and family members and coworkers are experiencing this alongside you in many cases. Next slide. And I always like to start off by taking a step back and just reminding ourselves what we mean as autism specialists when we say autism spectrum disorder, because there are lots of other features that people with autism might have. But when we talk about an autism diagnosis, what we're really talking about are two categories of symptoms. One is that this person has difficulty developing or using their social communication skills in day-to-day interactions. And the other is that they are more inflexible or more repetitive or more sensory focused in their behaviors. And so there are other behavioral symptoms and learning symptoms that can sometimes also be associated with autism, but those are separate from that autism diagnosis, which is social communication difficulties and restricted repetitive or sensory behaviors. Next slide. So I get this question a lot. What level of autism, or where is my child on the spectrum? And I'll be honest, it's not an easy question for me to answer when I'm meeting with families and talking to them about this diagnosis. There are levels. So you can see this graphic here that talks about the 3 functional levels of autism. So level 1 is a person that requires some support because of their social communication or behavioral differences. But this would be sort of the mild autism case. They need some support, but it's milder. Level 2 means that they require more substantial support. So they have more difficulty with these social communication symptoms and behaviors than other people, and they may need more help there. And then level 3 would be requiring very substantial support. So these would be the more severe cases where children have more significant deficits with their social communication and their behaviors. But where I struggle with this is that where a child is in the moment that I'm seeing them in that snapshot where I've evaluated them and I'm talking to their parent about autism doesn't really tell me a lot about where they're going to go. And many children will show improvement and have less severe symptoms as they get older. And then if we practice some interventions and we practice and teach these skills, we see that those symptoms become even less severe. So as a young child with autism, a child might be a level 3 at that young age, but that doesn't tell me what that child's going to look like moving forward. So I will usually try to explain that to parents. Here's where the level is falling right now. And our goal is to move toward that milder rating later in life. Next slide. So what are the things that I'm making sure when families walk out the door after meeting with me, what are the things that I want to make sure they address? So the first is, and the parents that spoke were so, they really are aligned with some of the things that I want to make sure parents know. Know what resources are in your community. Know how to find early intervention services, which are typically birth to 3. Know how to find preschool or school age special education services if your child requires those supports. How to access behavioral health services. So applied behavior analysis or ABA therapy has really strong evidence that it is effective in teaching the social communication skills that children with autism need help with. And it can be effective in shaping some of the behaviors that might, if they are causing problems in that child's life. So know how to find those resources in your community. Early Start Denver model is another version of an ABA approach that involves a lot of parent training, but there are multiple ways that these services might be named or titled in your community. So it's really important to know what's available to you. And I also think it's incredibly important to think about research opportunities that might be available to you and your child. I'm not talking necessarily about drug treatments. I'm talking about opportunities where you can learn more about your child's health or about their behavior or about their learning style or their cognitive abilities. And many research studies will offer you the ability to learn more about your child and at the same time contribute to the science that helps us to provide better care moving forward. Next slide. And then the other thing that I think is really important is to make sure that you're talking with your team and you're thinking about medical care and things that need to be considered. So this graphic on this slide shows a sampling of some of the co-occurring medical and behavioral conditions that can occur in people with autism. And some people with autism have none of these, but most have at least one or more of these co-occurring medical or behavioral symptoms. And I know that other people are going to talk about ways that you can utilize medical services and benefits to address those symptoms. I want to make sure families know about genetic testing, which at this point is now a very routine recommendation. 20 years ago, we didn't have a lot of answers. Now we have a much better sense of some of the genetic differences that are associated with autism symptoms, and having that knowledge allows parents to be able to fully advocate for their child's needs and address other medical or learning needs that may be associated with that genetic difference. So these two tests that are listed here are the most common screening tests that we recommend when a child has an autism diagnosis. And then I think it's important to think about and talk with your primary care doctor or your autism specialist to find out if there are other medical specialists that should be involved in your child's care, whether that be a neurologist, a gastroenterologist for GI issues, feeding specialist, sleep specialist, and many others, depending on your child's specific symptoms. Next slide, please. So then I thought it would be helpful to put together a few slides around some of my FAQs, my frequently asked questions that I get from families. And the first one is, what can we expect? What does this mean for my child's future? What should I be expecting for their adult life? Next slide. The answer is, I don't have that crystal ball and I don't know. I can't tell you exactly what to expect. And that's true for my own children as well, right? But what I can say is that when we look at research that looks at individuals with autism at their diagnosis and follows them over time, some recent studies would suggest that about a third of kids who are diagnosed at a young age will improve in their symptoms within the first few years. Many, and again, this is a very recent study that has only followed kids for a few years, many stayed stable in their severity rating of autism. And you know, what's been really challenging is that severity scores at early diagnosis are not great predictors for what severity will look like later on in childhood. So what that means is when you are getting that initial diagnosis and someone is giving you a level 1, 2, or 3, that doesn't necessarily predict what we can expect for your child. What I tell families is that I want you to plan for your child's future what you planned before this autism diagnosis, and then we're going to work on teaching skills and interventions to try and get there. And if we need to reframe our plans at some point, we'll do that. But at a young age, at an early diagnosis, I'm not taking anything off the table for any patient. And I threw some of my favorite autism quotes in and peppered them throughout this talk. And Dr. Stephen Shore is one of my favorite speakers. He is an autistic adult and a professor of special education. And he's given tons of TED Talks, and look him up. He's got really great talks about being a person with autism. And he says within every child is a connection to one form or another and a potential waiting to be fulfilled. And that's what I believe. And so that's what I want families going home believing in their child as well. Next slide. So then the question of ABA often comes up. I'm recommending ABA because it's got really strong evidence that it's helpful for kids with autism to help them to learn these skills. But parents will say, I've heard bad things or I've read bad things about ABA therapy. Why is that? Why are you recommending it? How do I know what's true? Next slide. So here's what we know about ABA. So behavior analysis is the behavioral principle that ABA is based on. And behavior analysis uses knowledge of how behavior is affected by the environment and uses positive reinforcement or motivators, finds things that the child loves or is interested in, and uses those motivators to help shape their behavior and their learning. It's very much focused on individualized building of skills, meaning that the goals of one child might be very different than the goals of another. But it does have very strong research evidence in people with autism to show that they can improve intellectual, language, social, and daily living functioning. So ABA therapy will work for any human because it's based on what we understand about human behavior, but having an autism diagnosis, because of the research that has been done, should allow for educational or medical benefits to cover specific therapies addressing those behavior goals. Next slide, please. I think we skipped one. Or maybe it, nope, must not be in there. The other thing that I will say about ABA therapy before I touch on this one is that some of the myths, the reason that people have concerns about ABA therapy is because some versions of ABA therapy can be a little repetitive. It can be kind of like doing flashcards or drills with a child. And there are certain kids with autism who need that type of instruction early on to build those basic skills in order to get to the goals that the team has for that child. So in that early phase of ABA for a child that's really working on very basic learning skills, it can feel very repetitive, but high quality ABA therapy should be driving toward a more flexible teaching approach that allows the child to generalize something that they learned at the table with their therapist into the real world. So I think sometimes ABA can get a bad reputation if it is in fact very repetitive and they don't move into that more flexible teaching approach at some point. The other thing that sometimes people have said about ABA is that it's trying to make the child not have autism or get rid of the autism symptoms completely or change who the child is. And I would say that's never what I want for my patients. So you heard those parents talking about all the great things about their children, and we want that to be the case for every individual. A good, high quality ABA program is going to be focused on supporting the child to be successful in their day-to-day functioning and their interactions with people, which will allow them to live a full and successful life in whatever they want to do. It should not be focused on trying to change who they are or remove behaviors that are part of their personality as an individual. So I wanted to address some of those myths. Okay, we can go to the alternative treatments. This is a really controversial question, but it comes up all the time. So I feel like I need to talk about it when I have the opportunity. What about alternative treatments? Usually parents don't come in asking that. They usually come in asking about a specific thing that they've heard about on Facebook or from a friend or another family member, and they want to know what I think. So I'll tell you. Next slide, please. The truth is, the reason that these treatments are labeled as alternative is because they've not been researched. We haven't studied them, or in some cases they have been researched and they've shown to not be beneficial and to be quite dangerous in some cases. Now, most alternative treatments that families ask me about are probably pretty harmless in terms of the health and safety of the child, but they may not be providing much of a benefit. And in some cases, they can come at a tremendous cost to the family, cost of money, cost of time. So when I'm talking with families and they're asking me about a specific intervention, we're going to need to tease that out. What is it you're hoping that this is going to do? And we need to really think and weigh the risks and the benefits for any intervention. Personally, I'm never going to want a family to stop the evidence-based treatments that we know to be effective, like ABA therapy and early intervention, in order to pursue something that maybe is promising greater outcomes, but doesn't have the research to back it up. I'm going to want families to really gather their data, collect their data, and if they are thinking about trying something new, in spite of my concern, I'm going to want them to make sure that they have really good data before and after that trial, because we want to know if what they did caused some negative effects or some changes in behavior that we weren't anticipating. And when a family is pursuing other interventions with other doctors, even if they are medical interventions for another reason or another, the goal is to always try to make one change at a time, because we want to know if any intervention or new treatment is having a specific impact. And if we change too many things at once, we won't know what caused what. There are alternative treatments that are quite dangerous and in some cases have caused death in children. And so one of the most important things that I want my families and every family to know is that if you're thinking about this or considering this or even planning to do it, please talk to your child's doctor and their therapist. Make them aware so that they can help support you and monitor the effects of this. So I can only see part of this quote, but it says, our duty is to, in autism, is not to cure, but to relieve suffering and to maximize each, I can't read the rest of the words on my screen, but each individual's ability to be their best self is how I take this away. So I think that that is an important thing to remember. It's not about trying to change who a person is, and there is no cure, right? It's really about trying to maximize their potential and make them be as comfortable and supported as they can be. Next slide, please. Oh, there's the ABA slides. They got looped around a little bit. So these are some of those myths that I was talking about earlier. So, you know, ABA is not all rote memorization and repetition. It should be generalizable, and we're not trying to get rid of anything. And goals of ABA should really be something that the family, that's meaningful and helpful to the child and the family. And if that's not the case, then it's probably something for the family to have a conversation with their ABA team. And I love this quote. This is from a family member who has a child with autism. Behavior is communication. If you change the environment, the behaviors will change. Next slide, please. So want to touch on a couple of resources, although you're going to get a lot more information in just a few minutes from the response team. CDC has some really great basic information on how to track down for your state where to get early intervention birth to 3 services and how to find preschool special education services after age 3. Autism Speaks has this really nice resource where you can go and search by state for insurance benefits and resources that might be helpful. And then these last 2 websites, I literally give out to every single family that I see. Both of these websites, one is from Autism Speaks, one is out of CHOP where I work, but it's a free resource. They both have a zip code search where you can put in your zip code and you can find therapists, resources, even extracurricular opportunities like support groups, play groups, sports activities, things of that nature. So I think it's really important to take advantage of what's out there in your community. And these both of these resources are great ways to track that down. Next slide. And then I know you're going to hear a lot more about this, but this is another resource that I literally give out to every family. So the network that I'm a part of that works with Autism Speaks has created many, many toolkits for families. And I included some of the ones that are more commonly in need of families with young children. However, Isaac's parents mentioned some of the toolkits that are helpful closer to adolescence, and there are even some toolkits for adults as well. So I always like to make sure families know to check out the toolkit website on Autism Speaks. There's a lot, and all of these resources are free. Next slide. So just a couple more quotes that I love to share. This one I think might be one of my favorites. Stop thinking about normal. You don't have a big enough imagination for what your child can become. And this is from an autistic tightrope artist, which I thought was really cool. What a great job. And then the last quote is, don't think that there's a different, better child hiding behind the autism. This is your child. Love the child in front of you. Encourage his strengths, celebrate his quirks, and improve his weaknesses the way you would with any child. That's my favorite part of this quote. You have to work harder for some of this, but that's the goal. So I always like to end on a positive note because I think that that is the case and that is the truth for so many of the kiddos that I see. I have been lucky enough to have a few of my patients graduate into the adult world really successfully. And what I can tell you as parents who have received a new diagnosis, that there are really amazing outcomes for our patients as they grow up, as for my patients as they grow up. And that's what I love to be able to share. I think that's the last slide. So thank you.
Hi, I'm Kelly Hedrick, and I'm part of the advocacy department at Autism Speaks. We have a small staff who works on public policy on behalf of individuals with autism and their families. And I'm here today to just talk to you a little bit about access to services and some of the laws and regulations that we have worked on and continue to work on that can help make sure that you have access to the things that you need. It's not to 100% yet. We still have work to do, but it is something that I'm proud that Autism Speaks has helped to create, because it's vastly different now than, if you go back 10 to 20 years in terms of what insurance will cover and some other things. I don't have an immediate family member with autism, but I do have an extended family member. And I know that it's easy to get lost in a world of lots of acronyms, and you think of services maybe in one big area, and there are some distinctions about the kinds of services that you should have access to, and what they're designed for, and which systems they come to you through, and ideally there's some integration between them. But I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the healthcare services and then the special education services, those two main buckets. And I am going to sometimes use autistic child or person and sometimes use person with autism, because we have asked the community what their preferences are, and there's not one. There are many things about the autism community where people feel very differently, and so we at Autism Speaks interchange those terms because some prefer one and some prefer the other. So you'll see me do that as I go along. Next slide, please. All right. Oh, and I forgot to say, I'm sorry, the healthcare bucket is designed to address symptoms of autism and co-occurring conditions that you heard from Dr. Bennett about, and you've probably experienced with your child: seizure disorders, sleep and GI problems, for example. The special education budget is really designed to focus on the curriculum, but also any special accommodations that your child may need to be part of that school system and to learn. So there's some interplay between, but one is healthcare and one is special education. Okay, we can go on. I think that Dr. Bennett touched on all or most of these. When you think about autism services, some people go straight to applied behavior analysis because it is a behavioral therapy. It's the thing that we've had to fight most recently to make sure is covered in insurance. And not every child is going to be recommended for all of these types of services. It's going to vary by the individual, but the kinds of things would be, of course, the screening and diagnosis, the therapeutic services. So I heard occupational therapy was really helpful to Sean, physical therapy, sometimes speech, psychiatric and psychological care, as well as those behavioral health treatments. Next slide, please. So, you're wondering, what do I expect if this is brand new to you? You don't know what may be covered, what may not be covered. We're going to talk about that, and it's going to vary a bit by the type of health insurance you have, how you're covered, although that is gradually changing, and we're trying to level the playing field with mental health parity laws. There's a federal mental health parity law now. Some states have their own, and what that law says is, if a plan that you are covered by for health insurance covers the suite of kind of medical surgical benefits, you should have the equivalent level of coverage without denials of mental health services. And autism is a mental health diagnosis. So it's very complicated. You don't feel like you have to take, notes, detailed notes. We have a lot of resources on our website. The art team can help you. So feel free to, follow up to this with any questions that you may have specific to your situation. But I'm going to walk you through a little bit of the different types of insurance and how they're regulated. Next slide. I hope you can see this. I'm actually going to change my view so that I can see it really larger screen. So the the first set of columns is if you receive your insurance through your employer. So you may be a federal employee and you get the federal health plan. State employee, you get the plan that's in your state. If you're a member of the military, there is a military specific plan, and that is TRICARE, and there's also a CHAMP VA that covers certain individuals that are military associated. And then for everyone else, it would be another employer-sponsored health benefit. Now, some employer-sponsored health benefit plans are the type where they pay all claims directly through that company or that entity. They pay someone to administer the program and do all the paperwork, all the claims, but they actually write checks to cover all expenses. The other type is a fully funded health benefit plan where the insurance company itself charges the employer to take on the risk of paying out all those claims, and they charge the company, and the company passes along to the employees some partial share for that. And so the company is taking on the actual paying of claims. Those are regulated a little bit differently because some of these plans are federally regulated, some are state regulated, and some have an element of both. You can also buy a plan on what's called the marketplace or the exchange that came about from the Affordable Care Act. And those can be helpful if you don't have an employer-sponsored plan or another type of plan, but you can afford to pay sometimes with assistance to have one of these plans. You can also go through, if you don't qualify or don't want to use the ACA marketplace, you can go to a broker, directly purchase a policy. There's also Medicaid and CHIP that some children are eligible for, and that's a federal-state partnership. And then if you don't have any insurance, there are some resources that I'll suggest. But what is covered for you can vary by who you're receiving that insurance or health benefit plan through. Next slide, please. This is just to mention, if you don't have health insurance and you're looking for a solution there, you can look to the marketplace, and there's a link. These slides will be shared, and these are live links here. Some states have Medicaid eligibility buy-ins, and you can look into CHIP and whether there's some variation with what is covered in CHIP state by state, but you can look into whether CHIP is a potential option for your child. Next slide, please. We have a couple of slides just to give you examples so that this becomes real to you. And the two states that are on here as examples are Texas and Florida. So when we're looking at what plan types does the state's autism insurance law apply to? So we go around passing these requirements state by state and try to make sure that all the plans that the state does regulate will provide the full suite of autism services. In Texas, the state employee plan has subcategories. Some of them are subject to the mandate, some are not. Florida, yes, it's fully covered. In Texas, the individual or non-group plans through a broker or the exchange are, and in Florida, they are not. In fully funded, the larger group employee plans, they are. Those that can be state regulated. The ones that are self-funded are not state regulated. Those are only federally regulated. In both states, they are. And then with the small group employer plan that are state regulated, Texas does have the requirement, Florida does not. Next slide, please. And then this gets into what services and treatments the state law requires. And you can see here, there is a slight variation between Texas and Florida. When these laws were initially passed, and some of them a decade ago, often there were qualifications put in, like, only till age X, or if diagnosed by age X, and the maximum for that year is this amount, and a lifetime maximum is that amount. Mental health parity laws should, and gradually are, through litigation and through having plans review if they're in compliance or not, having state insurance commissioners review that. It should nullify those qualifiers and have that be something that everyone should have access to, even if the law that's on the books doesn't change. Mental health parities should supersede that. Next slide, please. And also some good news beyond the mental health parity is that some of the state regulated plans are more generous than what's technically in the law. They're seeing that they need to be more generous, that mental health parity is headed in that direction. So for example, the Florida Blue Cross Blue Shield, the Florida Blue, has added an ABA benefit to a couple of its plans and made it available up to age 65 in some cases. Next slide, please. If you are examining the plan that you have or are looking at for a new employer, you want to try to get as much detail as you can, ask for the details of the plan in writing, and look for different exclusions or caps or limitations that may be there. That's step one, and that would be from your HR department, or if you're dealing with a broker, ask the broker. Next slide, please. And then step two can be to learn about in more detail the mental health parity law that applies to all states. It's called MAPIA for short, the acronym is. And you can use a tool that's linked here called Parity Track that can give you some details about the laws in your state, the regulations, and help you make the case if it's a plan that has some of these exclusions, that should not be something that you're facing. And we can help. You can reach out to the autism response team for help with any of these things, understanding it, helping make the case to an employer, and so forth. Next slide, please. Okay, going to special ed. You probably have heard of the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, unless your child was just brand new diagnosed or hasn't interacted with early intervention yet. But beginning at age 3, all children are entitled to a free, appropriate public education in the least restrictive environment that they can be. And this is FAPE for short. And it may include, depending on the child, placement in a mainstream class or a special ed class at a public school with the appropriate modifications or accommodations. It could be placement at a private school at public expense if the school district can't provide you the appropriate education and services for your child. And it can involve the provision of some of the services that are also required under healthcare plans. It just depends on the details of that child's case. Next slide, please. And one last important thing that I want to call your attention to, and this is something that often is more relevant when your child is older or is going into adulthood. States and the federal government work together to provide services that are not exactly fitting into the education budget and not exactly fitting into the health insurance bucket that we've talked about. They're called home and community-based services, or sometimes called waivers, because it's an agreement between the federal government and the states to pay for certain things. And it's included are things like respite care, so breaks for the caregivers, in-home supports, living situations, group homes and other things, day programs that may be necessary, as well as supported employment and pre-voc training, transportation, and other things, modifying the home where it may be needed. These waivers often, unfortunately, have very long waiting lists. And so focus right now on what your child needs immediately, but be aware that if you think your child may need services that are of this type, home and community-based services, a little bit down the road, go ahead and inquire about getting on that waiting list now. Don't wait, so that the years that it may take to get to you, you're already on that list. So we just encourage you to there's a link that will let you look at the Medicaid page for your state that goes into more details. The waivers vary a little bit state by state, but do be aware that those services are also available where needed, and but sometimes it takes a long wait, unfortunately, to get to them. The last slide that I have, next slide, is we'd love to have you involved with our advocacy if you're interested. It's through staff and volunteers that these laws have been able and regulations have been able to be passed by Autism Speaks and partners that work together on these things. You can follow us on the advocacy social media channels. You can sign up to receive advocacy alerts and updates by email and find out, your elected officials, if they're not already top of mind as to who they are. It doesn't, it's really something that you just can choose to do and receive. It doesn't commit you to anything, but you'll receive an update periodically saying, here's an action that we would love to have you take in your state or to your member of Congress that will help pass that law. So we'd love to have you when you receive these slides, or if you want to go online, autismspeaks.org/advocacy. There's lots of good information, including how to sign up for those things, or follow us if you're on social media for the type of social media that you're on. Thank you so much. And I know that this will likely lead to some insurance related or special ed related questions that will come in. If not, we may not have time today, but through the autism response team, and we'll be standing by, my colleagues and I will be standing by to try to help with those as quickly as we can. And now I'm going to introduce Susan Kelso, who is, I believe, our last speaker, and who is an autism response team associate, who can tell you all about some of the resources and the way in which that team is there to help you. Susan?
Thank you very much, Kelly, and hello, everyone. I want to thank you all for being here. I love seeing where everyone is from, internationally and everywhere around the country. I just want to let you know the Autism Response Team is here to serve anyone in the autism community. We're a free service, and we are an information and resources line. So we get calls for questions from parents, from autistic adults, from teaching staff, and we provide information to help everyone access services and supports in their community. We're 10 people across the country. We all come with different experiences, different backgrounds, but we all share a deep passion for the autism community. So here is our contact information. It's going to be at the end of the conversation as well. Today, I'm just going to let you know a little bit about the top 10 resources that we like to share, or that we get requests for from parents whose children have been recently diagnosed. So the first is our 100-day kits. We have 2 of these kits. The 100-day kit for young children is for kids 4 and under, and the 100-day kit for school-age children 5 and above. And basically, these toolkits are a roadmap to kind of guide you through those first 100 days after a diagnosis. It's going to include information about autism, about therapies and treatments, and how to access some of these services and supports. We do provide a complimentary hard copy. So if you're interested in this, please contact the Autism Response Team and we can order that for you. It's going to be delivered to a FedEx in your area and you can pick it up. Next slide, please. We get a lot of questions about autism, of course. What is it? Do we know about causes, treatments, what have you? We do provide a lot of information about autism, but I encourage you to take a look at our website. You'll find a menu item that actually says about autism, and you'll find this information there. We also have additional information. So if there's a question that you have that isn't covered online, please feel free again to contact Art. We have information specifically for women and girls who've been diagnosed with autism. We have information for siblings, books, all kinds of good stuff. So, okay, next slide, please. We have a number of resources that we like to share with family and friends. We have a number of toolkits. This is one of ours. We have a number of family support toolkits, one for parents, one for siblings, and one for grandparents. This is a wonderful resource that can help explain autism and basically how it relates to the relationship between, say, a grandparent and an autistic grandchild, or a sibling who has an autistic brother or sister. We also have information online for parents whose children have been newly diagnosed. Now, I should say that you see all of this blue text that's underlined. These are all hyperlinks, and if you click on the blue text, it's going to take you to that page on our website. So when you do get a version of this, you're welcome to click on these links. Finally, we do have a Facebook group. It's called Navigating a New Autism Diagnosis. This is an Autism Speaks community. We encourage you to join. You can find support, community, information. Okay, next slide, please. You know, as Dr. Bennett mentioned, we actually have 43 toolkits at Autism Speaks. Some of the ones that we get the most requests for are toilet training, sleep issues, how to deal with trips to the dentist, haircuts, feeding issues. There's a ton of them. And so if you see here the link to the toolkits index, and you will find all of our toolkits listed. And of course, these are all free. Next slide, please. So we get a lot of questions. I need ABA for my child, OT, speech and language therapy. We're looking for a naturalistic strategy, social skills classes. It can be a real challenge to navigate these services, to find local providers. It can take a lot of time. This is what ART is here for. Another service that we like to provide. If you're having a hard time locating providers in your area, we have two options. One is our resource guide, and you can search the guide by your zip code, by your state, and by the type of service you're looking for. So you'll see here on the right is just our index for treatments and therapies. And you can see that these run the gamut, you know, from ABA to social to speech and language, all kinds of good things. Okay, next, please. We get a lot of questions regarding health insurance coverage of autism services, and usually it's specifically about services, the ABA services that would be covered by health insurance. We get calls from parents who are having trouble accessing funding for ABA through their health insurance. We are absolutely welcome to field your questions about that if you find yourself stuck. We do have a number of options, and on our website, if you click on this health insurance coverage for autism, as Kelly was saying, we have a lot of information for you about the different types of health insurance coverage, whether or not they're going to cover ABA services. And of course, you see this map on the right. Our advocacy team has worked so hard for a number of years, And we're successful in getting ABA to be covered by Medicaid as a funded therapy. So I just wanted to give kudos to our advocacy team for doing that. Next slide, please. Okay, state benefits and services. When you have a child who has been diagnosed with autism, sometimes you just don't know what you don't know, right? What are the state benefits that I can receive? Some of these benefits are things like Social Security, Medicaid or Medi-Cal health insurance, and what are called Medicaid or Medi-Cal waivers. We can provide you with information about these resources, as well as methods of connecting with these resources. We also have state-specific programs that we can provide you with information about. For example, in California, we have the regional centers. In Florida, they have the Center for Autism and Related Disabilities. And in New York, they have the OPWDD, the Office for People with Developmental Disabilities. If you're looking for resources in your state, or Social Security, Medicaid, what have you, please contact us and we can point you in the right direction. Next slide, please. Education. We get a lot of questions, especially pertaining to accessing services and supports in an educational setting. Part of this process is going through the IEP process. IEP stands for Individualized Education. I always like to say plan. I think that's right. So we do have an IEP toolkit. Thank you, program. We do have a toolkit to help guide you through the IEP process. We're here for parents who are having challenges with the IEP process. And so we can give you toolkits. We can help you find local special education advocates if that's something necessary. We also have the School Community Toolkit, and this is a resource that helps educate anyone in the educational setting about autism. So, of course, teachers, other students, bus drivers, custodians. So if this is something that you would like to share with your child's school and educate everyone in that environment about, this would be a great toolkit for you. Okay, next, please. Challenging behaviors. Okay, we get many questions about kids who are having some difficulty with frustration, perhaps some self-injurious behavior, maybe a little bit of aggression, meltdowns. Okay, these can be situations that we find autistic kids struggling with and their families. So we have our Challenging Behaviors Toolkit. There are a number of sections that discuss approaches to working with challenging behaviors, including managing crises and working through the problems by changing the environment. Okay, so I won't get into it too much there, but this will help you learn a little bit about how to work with your child to address these behaviors. We also have some tip sheets, anxiety, irritability, and of course we have information about anxiety and autism, about meltdowns and autism. So anytime that you're having a hard time with your kids' behavior, we're happy to share these resources with you. We can also, like I said before, we can help locate providers of ABA in your community if this is an approach that you would like to take. Next slide, please. Planning for the future, right? So you have a child who's newly been diagnosed. And a lot of parents, it's a very common response to say, oh my goodness, what's going to happen down the line. It's a natural concern, right? We can provide you with some information. We do have the financial planning toolkit. This can, on the right, you're going to see some of the topics that are covered in the financial planning toolkit. Anything from ABLE accounts, which is a special savings account for people with disabilities, which is a tax-free plan, will not affect their access to benefits or eligibility for benefits. We have guardianship, conservatorship, all kinds of important programs and information to help you plan for your child's future. I also want to point out we have a podcast. It is called Autism POVs. And this one is interesting for people who are looking to plan for their child's future, practical financial tips. I do want to share with you that our podcasts cover a number of different subjects. So there's a podcast about autistic women, a podcast about non-speaking individuals, voting rights, transition. If you click on this link, it will take you to this specific podcast, but you can just search the website for podcast, and this information will come up and it will take you to the links for all of the podcasts. So those are our top 10. I appreciate you bearing with me. I know I went rather quickly through these resources. I just want to say, if you have any questions, if you need information or resources, we're here to help you.
Thank you so much, Susan. I appreciate that wonderful information. The Autism Response Team is absolutely wonderful. So please, please don't hesitate to reach out to them at any time. We have just that was just the tip of the iceberg of the wonderful resources that we have. So thank you so much for that. So I think we have about 10 minutes for questions. And I know that there were some that came through the Q&A box, and some people had answered them, but I think that there are a few that are really worth re-asking. And I think most of them will probably be for Dr. Bennett, but I will answer the first one. That is, first and foremost, someone asked, will tonight and next week be recorded and distributed? Yes, they will. That is part of the follow-up resource that we will send you, the Zoom link, so that you can go back and watch this recording at your leisure. So absolutely. I did see a question about what's the difference between IBI, which I believe stands for Intensive Behavioral Intervention, and ABA, which is Applied Behavioral Analysis. I didn't know if Dr. Bennett, you wanted to answer that, if you knew the answer to that question.
So I'm not a behavior analyst. I'll start off by saying that, but my understanding is, so intensive behavior intervention, it used to be called early intensive, EIBI was sort of the initial name. And it really refers to having that intensity of working with the child to shape the behavior and build the skills. ABA is the behavioral principle, behavior analysis, the behavioral principle or approach that is often used as the IBI. So states will have different names. In Pennsylvania, the way you name ABA therapy in my state has changed 3 times since I've been a practicing developmental pediatrician. So they will change what they call it, but in all 3 of those names, it was using ABA principles to address autism symptoms. So your state might call it IBI, another state might call it BHRS or IBHS. They have different names for that same principle of using behavioral strategies to shape behavior and build skills.
Thank you. And one of the resources that we have at Autism Speaks is a parent's guide to ABA. It's a wonderful toolkit. It's one of those 43 toolkits that Susan mentioned. So be able to check those out as well, because that's really, really helpful. Another question came in, and I think this is really great to answer, is what are the different levels of autism? We know that's changed over the years, and there's no longer PDD-NOS and Asperger's as we referenced before. So can you talk a little bit about what these new levels are, those autism spectrum disorder levels 1, 2, and 3?
Yes. So what is autism hasn't really changed over the years, but the specific diagnostic criteria are reevaluated every several years by a group of experts. And the most recent version of the diagnostic criteria removed some of those older labels like PDD, NOS, and Asperger. So, and the reason I think that that was done is because those labels were being given without very clear criteria as to what makes one diagnosis over another. And people were assigning sort of qualifications that, like, so Asperger's was more desirable in some people's view, but in reality, all of those diagnoses shared the same core features that we talked about at the beginning of my talk: social communication difficulties, restricted repetitive behaviors. The new diagnostic criteria that have been around for maybe about 7 or 8 years uses this level 1, level 2, level 3 that I mentioned in my talk, which really just refers to how much support does this individual need with respect to their autism symptoms. And you can have just a general autism level 1, 2, or 3, or you may have a breakdown level based on their social communication, and then a different level based on their restricted or repetitive behaviors. I will say I don't automatically assign a level unless it is needed, because, as again, I've said, I see my patients change sometimes, and they may start off as a level 2 or 3, and with intervention and age and maturity, move closer to a level 1 or 2. So I don't automatically assign a level, but if it's required for insurance benefits or for any specific intervention to be approved, then I will give that level at that moment.
Okay, thank you. Very helpful. Thank you for answering that. And that's a nice segue to the next question, which is, does autism go away when a child starts completely speaking?
So no, it is really, really rare for a child's autism symptoms to completely go away. What I often see is that a child's symptoms, especially once they start talking, their symptoms may move into that milder category, depending on how their speech is developing and how they're using it. Because again, we're not talking about speech when we say social communication. We're talking about all ways that we communicate. So I see children who never had delays in speech, but still struggled with social communication. So the symptoms of autism are separate from the speech delays. They don't completely go away most of the time, but they may become mild enough that the average person on the street or at the bus stop might not necessarily recognize those symptoms. And it may be only in certain kind of more stressful situations or socially challenging situations that a person's autism might be more apparent.
Yes, thank you. Wonderful. This is a really great question that someone asked. Can you please address differences between male and female diagnoses and characteristics?
Yes, I saw that question. That is a good one. So again, a male or a female with autism, the thing that they share in common are those two core features: the social communication difficulties and restricted and repetitive behaviors. Females, what we understand about, and I think we're still learning, to be honest, I know the data right now would indicate that there are many more adult women getting diagnosed with autism now that were probably missed in childhood, partly because we don't know all of the differences that in terms of how someone can present with these symptoms. Girls who have less developmental delay tend to present a little bit later on in childhood, or in some cases adulthood, with these concerns for social communication. There are some differences in the way girls and boys play and the way they interact with each other, setting aside autism. And so it does make it sometimes more challenging to recognize those symptoms in a little girl. It can sometimes be challenging to recognize those symptoms in a little boy who doesn't have speech delays or other developmental delays. And so it's really important, I think, as a parent to talk to people about your concerns, share your concerns, and revisit those concerns if you still have them. If you have concerns and a child is making progress and getting better, great. But if you still see concerns in your child who is talking but struggling in other ways, it's probably good to just keep bringing those concerns back to your team and your provider so that they can monitor.
Great, thank you. A great question came in. Can you give an example or examples of what repetitive behaviors might look like?
Absolutely. So, and there's lots of different examples. So I usually, when I'm running through an interview with a family, I will ask about, do they do anything repetitive with their body? So those are some of the more classic symptoms that someone might see across the street or across a room and recognize as being a repetitive movement. It could be hand movements, it could be tensing or tightening up all the muscles, or repetitive movements of the fingers. Sometimes kids will rock their body back and forth, or they might like to spin in circles repetitively. It can also be repetitive use of objects. So sometimes children might get very repetitive with the way they play. They play with the same toys in the same way, or they like to line things up or sort or categorize them rather than playing in more creative ways. It can be repetitive use of speech or sounds, where they're making the same repetitive sound over and over, or saying the same lines, quoting from videos or TV shows, and saying those same repetitive lines in different scenarios. So it can be repetitive can mean lots of different ways that a person may be repetitive.
Yeah, thank you for that. One last comment that's kind of a comment and a question came from a parent who said that they were in a Facebook group and that there were other people who were upset with her referencing her son as having autism. And they corrected her and said that she should be saying that she has an autistic son. So her question is, have you heard about this? It's basically semantics where people are placing the adjective to describe the person.
Yes. So this is challenging, but in a good way, because I think that the more that we are hearing from autistic adults, we are hearing that they see autism as an identity. So if you think of the deaf culture, right? People who are deaf see their deafness as part of who they are, not as a disease. And so many parents will talk about their child with autism. And I have a parent partner that I work with who always says, my other child has asthma. I don't call him my asthmatic son. So why would I say my autistic daughter? And so a lot of parents prefer to say my child with autism or my child on the spectrum. But there are many adults with autism or autistic adults who prefer to refer to autism as part of their identity. So the parent who says my child with autism is using person first language. They're saying the child first, and then the autism is part of describing the child. The autistic adult sees autism as part of who they are. And so they're seeing the identity first. They're saying we want to identify as a person with autism before we talk about other parts of ourselves. It's a tricky situation. So I tend to try to, I think maybe it was you, Colleen, someone that said, like, we're going to kind of bounce back and forth between these two terms. And I try to do that when I'm writing about autism, when I'm talking about autism. I try to, usually I'll say up front, this is how I'm going to do this so that I'm respecting both groups. But I think that I'm of the opinion we should try not to shame anyone for using one type of language over another. I think we should try and respect and understand where people are coming from. We're in a wonderful place. It's challenging, but we're in a wonderful place where we have a lot of autistic adults who can speak up for themselves and say, this is how I feel and this is how I want to be referenced. But there are still some parents that feel very strongly that their child with autism is a child first, and I respect that as well.
Yes, thank you. And we do as well at Autism Speaks, and Kelly Hedrick our
That's who said
advocacy
it. I was trying to
said it.
remember.
And so
Yeah.
great point. Thank you so much for answering that. I know it's a really hot topic right now in the autism community. So I just wanted to thank everyone for being here today. We're at time. I want to remind everyone that we're going to be hosting a similar webinar next week, but this will focus on young adults and adults with an adult diagnosis. So please feel free to join us for that, or share with anybody that you can believe would benefit from attending. It's going to be wonderful. Also, please reach out to our Autism Speaks Autism Response Team for additional resources and materials. You can contact us at help@autismspeaks.org. You can call us at 888-288-4762, or in Spanish at 888-772-9050. We also have a live chat feature on our website at autismspeaks.org in the bottom right-hand corner of the screen. But I want to just thank everyone, our wonderful panelists. Thank you so much for being here, and the families who shared their stories today. Wherever you are in your journey, please know that we're here for you as an organization. We look forward to staying in touch. So have a wonderful rest of your evening or your day, and everyone, and take really good care.